All right, guys, we love talking to our next guest, one of the pioneers in the MMA media industry, one of the legends, joining us here today to talk about the big UFC 292 card, the man in blue, John Morgan. Welcome to Submission Radio, man. It's great to have you back on the show. Every time we catch up, it just brings back great memories and makes us wish we could get back out on the road with you, man.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. And I enjoy talking to you guys. So anytime. And I hope you do make it back on the road, man. I'd love to have you guys over here. Always a pleasure to see you boys working.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I did 100%. Well, we're going to be in Sydney, so we're doing the very, very short trip. But you know, the real stuff is in the US, where the beers are pounded heavily with yourself, man. Unless, are you coming to Sydney or?
I'm not making the trip, man. I'm kind of trying to cut down on those international trips.
To us, John.
I know. It's this fatherhood thing. I'm trying to be a good dad around here, not be gone so much.
All right, won't be the same with A. We'll have a few brewskis for you, man. Let's talk UFC 292, dude. Looking at the main event, you got Sean O'Malley getting his long-awaited title shot. I imagine you were probably there at the Contender Series when he first made his early debut, and people have been looking forward to this since his rise on said Contender Series. Yeah, he had that stumble against Cheeto, obviously. Now it's finally here, and it is a massive test, though, right? Coming up against Aljo, who is arguably one of, if not the greatest bantamweights in UFC history. How do you think, sort of kicking it off early, how do you think Sean's brilliant striking and fantastic distance game comes up against one of the most dominant grapplers in the division, who just kind of drowns people with his dominance once he hits the ground and takes the back?
Man, you just laid out there why I'm so absolutely intrigued by this fight. I mean, look, there's great things that make great fights, and part of things is all the stories behind this, right? The tension and the talk and all that makes it fun. But if you take all that away, take all the excess stuff out of it, and just break it down to a mixed martial arts contest. And this is phenomenal because Sean O'Malley, his striking is incredible. It's creative. It's dangerous. He's kind of got that long, lean frame. He's got power. He's coming at you with all types of attacks. Meanwhile, you've got Aljamain Sterling, who has this incredible grappling game. I mean, the human backpack, the human Jansport, the human anaconda. I love it because it's so dominant. So it's one of those fights where there's no mysteries in terms of, hey, I wonder what, fighter X is going to do when they get there. We know what game plans each of these guys is going to have. It's just a matter of who's going to be able to implement it best. And that's why I'm intrigued by this fight. And to answer your question, man, I think Sean O'Malley, his striking is going to be, I think it's going to look good out here. It's going to be incredible. I mean, you look at how he's been able to implement it throughout his career. As you mentioned, the stumble against Cheeto Vera, but I mean, this dude has been on a roll and he's just getting better. And man, I absolutely cannot wait for Saturday night.
Break this down a little bit for us, John, because I like Aljo. I think he's one of the great UFC champions that we've had, and his run's been unbelievable. But he's had a little bit of trouble getting the crowd on his side. Like, we've seen him have some difficult sort of receptions after his fights, and something's not connecting or clicking with some of the fans here and there. And I guess for a while, right, it was like, he is the champion, but that thing happened with Jan where people felt like, oh, well, he technically is, but isn't. Now he's built this crazy resume. He's one of the great champions the UFC has had, probably the greatest bantamweight champion the UFC has had. Do you think that this win over someone as popular as Sean O'Malley gets him across the line with a lot of those casual fans who maybe aren't paying the attention that they should to Aljo's incredible run?
I think it certainly has the opportunity to. Now, if this ends up being a razor-thin split decision victory, then maybe it doesn't. You know what I mean? And let's be honest, if you're not a hardcore fan of mixed martial arts, if you're just a casual fan of MMA, you're probably going to be more of a fan of Sean O'Malley's style than you are of Aljamain Sterling's style, right? That's just what we've seen over the years, is that the grappling doesn't necessarily translate to the casual fan that isn't really into mixed martial arts, but just wants to see two dudes go out there and punch each other in the face and bleed and see who falls down. His style doesn't really translate to that. But I think you bring up a great point, because we've heard in the build up to this Sean O'Malley saying, this is my opportunity to become a superstar, right? I become a UFC champion and my star power rockets into the stratosphere. I think there's a little bit of that on the line for Aljamain Sterling here as well, if he can get this done in convincing fashion. Because, and this is a little bit interesting, right? Because the hardcores at that point might be like, well, see, we told you Sean O'Malley was untested, that he was being rushed here a little bit. But the casuals will be like, oh, that was our guy. Did you see Aljamain just went out there and absolutely smoked the guy? So if he can get a convincing victory, and he's predicting a convincing victory, if he can do that, I absolutely see this as an opportunity to maybe finally sway some respect in Aljamain Sterling's direction.
We're sort of about to kick off the fight week. We've kicked off the fight week here in Australia. How are you feeling about this one, man? Like, who are you leaning towards when you think about it?
I'm really pumped about this fight. I am really intrigued for all the reasons we talked about. I think the clash of styles is incredible. What it means in the division is incredible. I mean, you got Chito Vera leaning out there, who's probably maybe even cheering for a Sean O'Malley win, because wouldn't that be a great title fight down the road? You got Merab Dvalishvili, who's hanging in the balance as well, who certainly deserves a title opportunity. How's that going? You got Henry Cejudo, who's saying, by the way, put me in there next. So there's so much that's going to come out of this. I think it's going to be one of those fights that we keep talking about, afterwards, because it's going to have that ripple effect. So I love this. I am leaning towards Aljamain Sterling a little bit. I mean, I look at the pedigree. I look at, what he's been able to accomplish. I do believe he's incredibly undervalued, I think, in terms of the skills. And I think, in terms of the well-rounded nature of what he brings to the table, the grappling aspect that he brings to the table, I think it's going to be problematic. That said, I'm not one of those guys that's writing off either athlete here. Sean O'Malley, that's what I love about this fight. Sean O'Malley brings to the table what I think you might need to beat Aljamain Sterling. Aljamain Sterling brings to the table what I think you might need to beat Sean O'Malley. And that's why I love this so much. And listen, I think Sean O'Malley's grappling is probably a little bit undervalued as well. I don't think he's just a fish out of water. We're not sitting here saying, oh, man, if this thing hits the ground, it's over instantly. No, we're not saying that. And he's got that dangerous striking. So I'm leaning towards Aljamain Sterling. I think he's just a little notch above Sean O'Malley right now at this point in his career. But I am certainly not counting Sean O'Malley out of this fight.
There's also massive stakes because this could be Aljo's last fight at bantamweight, right? And this is like unprecedented waters. Like the fact that he's willing to move up essentially for his teammate, or at least that being a huge part of it. Like there's never been anything like that. You had sort of the closest things probably like DC and Kane, but Kane was already the champion and DC kind of moved down to avoid that fight. It's not like Kane was like, I'm going to give away the belt and move down so that DC can come in. And that's basically what's happening here. But what's fascinating is it's Aljo. It could potentially be Aljo's last chance to prove himself and cement his legacy at 135, which is gonna, say a lot about him as like a bantamweight champion and the way we look back on him. But also, like, let's say best case scenario, he wins, he moves up. Do you think the UFC would give him the Volkanovski fight straight away? Or do they make him fight a contender first? Just because they've had like a very contested relationship since, forever. And then also Volkanovski's schedule, right? Like, once he's healthy, if you're Volk, you want to be busy, you want to be active, you probably want to face either Topuria first, or maybe if you can get the Makhachev fight, you do that. But those are the two biggest ones. I don't see them necessarily shelving Topuria and like doing, let's do the Aljo fight. So, but then Aljo might be waiting for a while, right? He might be waiting for like a year or 8 or 10 months. And then what if the UFC crown a bantamweight champion in the meantime? What if they're like, hey, well, you're moving up, so we got to do an interim champ or like a champion in the meantime, which would completely take away Aljo's leverage. And it would be shit for Aljo to come this far, have so many accomplishments, have the biggest fight of his career, and then get no pay-per-view points. It's a fascinating situation, right?
Boy, it really is. And I'll be honest with you, I hadn't really considered that aspect of it, because for me, I honestly believe this will be Aljamain Sterling's last fight in the bantamweight division, win or lose. And I think it makes sense because of what you said. Number one, he's admitted these weight cuts, aren't necessarily fun. I know he's showing that, hey, I'm in great shape. I'm not on a crash diet with all the Sean O'Malley trash talk. He's fine. But I think he's admitted, look, my body is probably better suited for 145 moving forward. Then you add in the fact of Merab Dvalishvili is there. And there really does seem to be such a brotherhood bind between these two that it's like, look, we're never going to fight. But at the same time, where does that real money come in? That real money comes in when you fight for the title. So if you really care about the guy as much as you say you do, you kind of got to give him that chance to fight for a title. And I think Merab Dvalishvili's next fight will be for the belt, whether it be against Sean O'Malley, whether it be against Henry Cejudo, whether it be Sandhagen, somebody else in the division. I think he's fighting for the belt next. But I hadn't really thought about the aspect of, well, so what does that mean for Aljamain when he goes to 45? Does he instantly go to the title shot? But as I began to think about it, I think you have to do it right away, right? I mean, obviously, you look at merit and all those things, but at the end of the day, the UFC is really just trying to put together the fights that make the most money, right? I mean, that draw the most eyeballs. And you mentioned it. I mean, Aljamain Sterling's kind of leverage goes away if they crown a champion. But I just think the attractability or the attractiveness of the fight kind of goes away a little bit if he's not that reigning champion moving up, right? Like, you can never assume anything. You don't bring somebody up to 45 and be like, well, let's put him against somebody, we're pretty sure he'll win against, and then he'll face the winner, because that just doesn't work. The MMA gods don't allow that stuff to happen, right? And there's no gimmies at the highest level of the sport. So what makes the most sense? And what makes the most sense for Volkanovski, right? For his legacy as well. He's the one that went up. When somebody else comes up, I'm sure he'd like to take him while they're quote unquote the reigning champion. Maybe a champion gets crowned in the meantime. But if you're the one that, hey, I put the 35 belt aside, I moved up to 45, that's when it's the most attractive matchup possible. So yeah, assuming the schedules all work out, obviously that all, paints into the picture as well, health of everybody and all that. But all things being equal, yeah, I think the UFC would want to make that fight right away, because you have the reigning champion moving up and facing the other champion.
Well, that's a good point. Like, schedule is really the key here, right? The schedule, the logistics. Like, Aljo didn't necessarily want this fight now. He wanted a little bit more time. He's got some nagging injuries. I'm curious also what you think about the way this fight came together. I think it's no secret really that the UFC would rather Sean O'Malley win here. And it's kind of like they wanted this for like the Boston card, right? Because they're like, Sean O'Malley, the Irish heritage, we're coming back to Boston. This fight makes sense. And I think that's a big part of why they're like, no, we're doing in August. We're not doing September. We're not going to have this fight in, say, Australia, where the market doesn't make as much sense. It actually kind of reminds me of like when Darren Till went up and fought, when Darren Till finally got a shot and fought Tyron Woodley. And you're like, okay, I see what's happening here. I wonder who you're leaning towards here. This kind of reminds me of that. What do you think, John?
Yeah, listen, I do think the UFC is smart enough to realize that, look, you can't assume a victory in either direction. There's no question they wanted Sean O'Malley to fight on a pay-per-view in Boston. It really does make sense. If you were running the business, you'd probably make the same decision, right? It really does make the most amount of sense. So it makes sense why they put this together. Look, do they feel that he's probably the more marketable guy? Yeah, look, this crowd, whether it was in Boston or not, I think was going to be a Sean O'Malley crowd. That's just, he's the young hip. He's got the it factor about it. He's, the streaming and the marijuana ties and the dyed hair. He's just, look, he's got that X factor about him. He's had it from day one, from Snoop Dogg, O'Malley. He's had that X factor about him, and he's been a star on the rise. And I think this is a huge opportunity for him. So I do think the UFC, I don't think they necessarily, were like, please, God, let's not have to deal with Aljamain Sterling. No, I think they realize his greatness and they realize what he's been able to do. And they realize that there's still more big fights for him available. But there's no question they put this fight together for a reason to put this thing in Boston. And I got to be honest. If I was running the business, I'd probably want to do the same thing.
Yeah, 100%, man. By the way, speaking of UFC 292, how are you going to be watching the fights this weekend? Because if you're looking for a bar or any kind of venue, our friends at Fanzo have you absolutely covered from head to toe. All you got to do is check out their app, Fanzo. You click on the fixture right here for Sterling and Sean O'Malley. It'll bring up a whole bunch of venues and pubs in your local area, like so. Let's check out, say, the Hotel Brighton. Ooh, they got the Asahi check-in challenge. I think we've had a look at the Hotel Brighton before. They've only got one screen, so that's a no from us. Saved us a crappy time this weekend. What about the Bay Hotel in Mornington? They got 9 screens, commentary, they serve food, and they got a projector. See, there's nothing wrong with that. Or you could even do the Sporting Globe, where they have 50 screens, commentary, serve food, beer garden, projector, and an outdoor screen. John Morgan, I know you'd be loving this right about now. Fans will have you covered. It's as easy as that, isn't that right, Dennis?
That's right, man. It's the ultimate venue finder for UFC fans. Just click the link in the description below and find the perfect app of the perfect bar for you and your mates this weekend.
That's right. And if you're going to be out in public, make sure you're looking your best. Don't be your scruffy usual self like I frequently am. Make sure to trim that beard, and Manscaped, our good friends at Manscaped, have you covered with the Beard Hedger Pro. Look at this bad boy, the rotary zoom wheel with 20 precision length settings for a custom length trim. My absolute favorite feature of this whole thing. You don't need to worry about a million attachments. You're in the shower, things are falling on the floor. You've got the rotary wheel. You can do, say, the sides short like I like and the bottom a little bit longer. You can shave off the mustache and look like the next great UFC wrestler, whatever you want. The 41mm titanium coated T-blade for comfortable trim and blade durability. The advanced lift comb lifts flat lying hairs for a smooth single stroke trimming. High performance battery with 1 hour charging and 60 minutes runtime per charge. And the other favorite feature, it's waterproof as well. So you can just smash it out while you shower. 2 birds with 1 stone. And if you get the Beard Hedger Pro Kit, you get the Beard Hedger itself. You get the beard shampoo, beard conditioner, beard oil, beard balm, and free gifts, the beard brush, beard comb, and beard scissors. How good is that?
Dude, it's amazing. And people have been asking us, what do we get, Dad, for Father's Day this year here in Australia? No more perfect gift than this Manscaped Beard Hedger Pro Kit. And you guys get 20% off and free shipping right now with a code word submission. We are brought to you by Manscaped. They're legends. Make sure to check out this Pro Kit today. But John, let's get back to the card because we got Chito Vera taking on Pedro Munoz. I got to ask you, how do you see this one going? And if he doesn't get a good win, would you rather see him get the long-awaited rematch against O'Malley or Sean versus Sandhagen next for the big title?
I mean, no disrespect to Corey Sandhagen, but if let's say Sean O'Malley walks away with the title and Chito picks up a win, I think you got to put that fight together, right? There's just so much heat on it. And I think the UFC have been doing a good job by kind of delaying putting that fight together. There were opportunities and calls for it along the way, but you kind of waited for it. And I think it all kind of paid off. So I don't mean that in a way, I know a lot of people are critical of Corey Sandhagen's last fight and, Henry Cejudo was like, oh, thank you. Now I'm not doing that. I'm just saying, come on, man. If these two guys both pick up victories, they're on the same card. The heat is there. The history is there. You got to do that one next. And Sandhagen's out for a little while anyway. He's healing up, right? So it's not like you'd really be putting a slight on the guy. I just think, again, when you've got these rivalries that are there, you've got to take advantage of them. Strike while the iron's hot, right? Because they're not always there for you. So when you've got these opportunities, I think you got to do it. If they pick up wins, I'm booking that fight ASAP.
Hey, just another thing also, like with Sean O'Malley, a little storyline in the background. He kind of dropped a bombshell with Aaron Bronstetter of TSN where he sort of targeted MMA managers. And he says he's got something big coming in the pipeline, which is interesting, right? Because the class action lawsuit against the UFC, that heated up as of a few days ago. And then obviously you've got fighter pay is always in the conversation. You've got Jake Paul, talking about a fighters union, which, seems more unlikely than ever. But this is a different angle and this is a different take. And Sean hasn't divulged everything, but it's very clear that he's felt the need to sort of, I don't know, do something. And he says he's going to drop it when the time is right. What do you think about, this approach, which is kind of like not so much fighter pay from like the UFC per se, but just a different angle on things? What did you make of it, John?
I'm intrigued by what he has to say because I like it. I think it's valuable discussion. Now, what I'm really interested to see is, did he get involved in a deal somewhere that went south or he didn't like the terms of, and so he's really just talking about one person, or is he talking about things as a whole? Because different managers handle things different ways. Some take 5%, some take 10%, some take 20%, some do sponsorships for you, some don't do sponsorship, some believe they deserve a cut of the bonus money, some people don't believe they deserve a cut of the bonus money. There's all these different discussion points. So I really think it's an intriguing discussion. Sean O'Malley has always been open about the financial aspect of the sport, and I think it's valuable. Because there may be some athletes out there that just don't know what the terms are. They don't know, especially when they're just getting into the game, right? If they've never heard these discussions and they happen to see a big time manager come up to them and say, here's what I can do for you. Here are my terms. If you don't realize, you can negotiate that if you want. That's not industry standard. I heard so-and-so gets this or it's done this way over there. So I really think it's valuable discussion. So I'm excited to hear what he brings to the table. I'm hoping it can be productive, so that maybe there can be some industry norms. Like you said, collective bargaining would be great if there was some way that the fighters could all come together and they could have, rules that, hey, managers are only allowed to take this much or managers are not allowed to touch bone or whatever the case may be. But I'm with you. I struggle to see everybody coming together for a union or an association. But at least if you can have kind of open discussion about this, then you can, educate people and you can help people make smart decisions as they're negotiating their deal. So I'm anxious to see what it is. I just hope it doesn't turn into, because what can happen is if it really boils down to it was one deal that he was involved in, or it's one person that he's talking about and it ends up just being attacked there, then that doesn't really serve the industry as a whole. But if it is an open and a discussion about all the options that are out there, then I think that proves valuable, because then how many people on the roster could hear what he has to say and then go back to their manager and say, hey, by the way, did you hear what Sean O'Malley said about this? I think I'd like to discuss that, when our contract renews or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Like yourself, man, I'm just intrigued to see what exactly it is when the time is right. Speaking of time, we'll let you go in a second, John. Just quickly, I wanted to touch on this Weili Zhang versus Lemos fight. It's pretty fascinating, man. Like Amanda Lemos has been on like a good streak since moving down from bantamweight, moving to 115. The only loss is to Jessica Andrade. Other than that, she's had a good streak. Good run, and it doesn't hurt that obviously finally we get like a fresh face for Weili Zhang as well. She had like 6 trillion rematches and back and forth fighting the same people with Joanna and Rose. What do you think about this one, man?
I like it in the terms of it was the fight to make because of exactly what you said. Now, listen, I'll be honest with you, I favor Zhang Weili in the matchup.
Sure.
But I'm glad Amanda Lemos is getting this for exactly the reason you said. She got on a little run. She's being rewarded for that. We're seeing a fresh face in there, a fresh matchup. And, it's kind of been those same names at the top, like you said, the Esparzas, the Namajunas, all those of the world. And so getting somebody else in there is good. Getting Zhang Weili as an opportunity is good. I do favor Zhang, as I said. What I'm really interested to see is what comes next, because you got Yan Xiaonan out there, and if they can put together that fight in China, man, Zhang Weili, Yan Xiaonan, 2 Chinese athletes in China. I mean, how valuable could that be for the organization in that market? So I'm anxious to see that. Although you kind of wonder if somebody's just keeping Tatiana Suarez's belt warm. You know what I'm saying? Like she is storming up the charts as well, and that's a fight I want to see her fighting for a title real soon as well. So I'm like I said, this particular fight, it doesn't speak to me the same way Aljamain and Sean O'Malley does, but I think it was the right fight to make.
Well, I'll tell you, man, unfortunately, we lost Cody Garbrandt off the card, but we get a long-awaited return of Chris Weidman. He takes on Brad Tavares, so that's going to be a lot of fun as well. And, of course, we'll see what happens in the big title fight, too. Of course, follow the man at MMA Underground and on social media for all your latest and best MMA coverage. John Morgan, thank you so much for joining us, man. Hopefully we can make it down there sometime and have a beer together. It was sorely missed.
It's been too long, fellas. We need to do that again. Always a pleasure talking to you.